Hey, welcome to the show, everybody. My name is Mike, and I will be your host. This is the Leadership Toolkit. As you know, we meet every single Wednesday afternoon. It's the definitive leadership podcast for you to take time and listen to other people's with awesome experiences, other people that have had awesome experiences to be able to learn from their successes, to be able to learn from their hardships, and be able to grow yourself and grow your team and all of the people that you encounter in your life. I am super excited today. Today is no different. I have a phenomenal guest, Damon Lembi. I had the opportunity to meet him on his podcast just recently within the last month. We got to have a conversation. He is the CEO of Learnit. He's the host of the Learn It All podcast, which was where I got the opportunity to sit and chat with him. He's a former baseball player. He has a baseball career, so he's able to draw from that sort of athlete's perspective. And I love that. So the metaphors that come in place between sports and business and leadership and management. So with that, I am so excited to bring on board on the Leadership Toolkit today, Mr. Damon Lembi. Welcome to the show, sir.
Mike, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know that you're going to have a lot of wisdom to share. And as we get into it, one of the things I always do with my guests, give that 2 or 3 minute elevator pitch, kind of who you are, what you do, what's your leadership and management experience. And then let's get into having a really collaborative conversation so that people can learn and grow.
Great. So like Mike said, I'm Damon Lembi. I live out here in San Francisco, a place called Sausalito. I was born and raised in the Bay Area. And growing up for me, it was all about sports. That was my favorite thing to do. All my friends were athletes. And fast forward to high school, I worked really hard at baseball, turned out to be pretty good. I was a high school All-American. I got drafted by the Atlanta Braves in the 13th round, dating myself here a little bit, 1990. Had a big choice. It was my first choice. Am I going to go play in the minor leagues, or I had a full ride in to go to Pepperdine University. And that was really my first learning about leadership. I chose to go to Pepperdine University because our coach, Hall of Fame baseball coach, Andy Lopez, had a great vision. You know, he dreamed big and he said, we're going to make it to the College World Series. So I went to Pepperdine. I went to Pepperdine University, and it was the first time in my career where I stepped out onto the field and everybody was as good as me. And I really experienced imposter syndrome. And I got hurt, ended up leaving Pepperdine, and was in a junior college for a year or so. Was fortunate enough to be looked at by Arizona State. And before I accepted the offer to Arizona State, a lot of people would say to me, hey, Damon, why don't you just go to a small school? Why don't you go to someplace you can play? Arizona State, they're going to have 17 people trying out for your position. And Mike, I really said, hey, this is my last opportunity for baseball. So I'm going to work hard and give it my all. And I didn't realize it at the time, but it helped me build and develop a 3-step approach to overcoming imposter syndrome that we can get into.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Played at Arizona State, had a great couple of years there, ready to move on to my next phase in minor league baseball. Things didn't work out. I didn't get drafted. And I was kind of sat there and thought to myself, okay, well, my identity as a baseball player, this is all I've ever known my whole life. And I kind of went into a little bit of depression. Here I am, 21, 22 years old. Fortunate for me, I come from a family who had multiple businesses, but I wasn't sure that any of my skills were transferable. And so I started at a company called Learnit. And again, this is 29 years ago now. And I started as a receptionist. And Mike, as we were talking backstage about your automotive career, and sometimes, getting that experience to work at all different levels of an organization, I went from being a receptionist to teaching classes to doing sales. And a couple of years into it, my dad and the board said they're looking for a new CEO. And I said, hey, let me throw my hat in the ring. I did. And I've learned a lot over the ways. And here I am now. Learnit is a live learning platform that has upskilled over 2 million individuals. And we're heading into our 30th year. And all my leadership lessons, and I've learned most of them have come from playing from some amazing baseball coaches and what I've seen working with our customers and the great teams I've had over the years.
I love it, man. Thank you for sharing that journey with you. I have a few questions now. I don't know one of the things that happens, anybody that listens to my podcast, like my brain goes over here and then all of a sudden I'm like, look, hey, look, squirrel, right? And we're off on a different direction. And so just roll with me on that. I love you sharing that journey. And I think it's so impactful. One of the things that I hung on to, and you talked about sort of your personal identity. Hey, this is who I was. And I think we all do that in life. You know, especially growing up, we start to identify who we are as kids. Like we were talking last week or few weeks back on your podcast. Like my daughter's a gymnast. She views herself as a gymnast. We start to say those I am statements. I am this. This is what I am, and so forth. So when you moved from just thinking back, you finished your college career and you moved in, you said, well, I'm the receptionist. What do you remember? What was the linchpin? What was the thing that made you throw your hat in the ring did you go directly from receptionist to CEO, or were there some other steps in between there? What were the other steps?
Well, the first reason why I went in as a receptionist was at the time my family had a very large real estate company, and we had a couple other businesses, and I was back to being a little intimidated and kind of doubted my skills, and I wanted to start at ground zero from somewhere, and Learnit was just opening up. But the other thing also, I wanted to prove to everybody else that I wasn't just Walt Lembi's boy, son, and be put at the top. So I went in, I rolled up my sleeves, I sat at the front desk. I think I still answered more calls than anybody. I went from being hitting a home run in the College World Series to a receptionist, and swallowed my pride, which I think is important to do. Was very humble, and it was kind of interesting. And I talk about this sometimes. You have this, and I'm sure with you in hockey, you have this competitive mindset, right? Like you want to win, you want to show up early, you want to do well. But it didn't take me very long to notice that not everybody thought that way or worked that way. People would show up late. They wouldn't really care. We'd lose a deal. And it really kind of drove me nuts. And as this was my family's business, I wanted to really give back and prove to them that I could add value. And also I didn't want to see their investment and Learnit be wasted. So I just worked really, really hard. And I went from one step. I didn't just go from receptionist to CEO. I went, like I said, I never even used computers back then. We did a lot of computer training. Sure. I learned computers. I taught classes. I got out there and made cold calls and did sales. And I think that with doing all that, the other 20, 25 people who worked at Learnit started to say, hey, this isn't some kid with just a silver spoon. This is somebody who wants to be here and adds value to Learnit.
And so I'm curious, one of the other things that you said, because you were talking about imposter syndrome, and before we get too far away, one of the things I find myself doing is we'll start out here and we have this whole conversation. 30 minutes later, I go, oh, but wait. So because you commented, you said early in your college career, you went on, you were expecting to be the hotshot baseball player, right? Mm-hmm. And I love that. My brother-in-law played baseball. I played hockey. My son played football. I have two kids that are gymnasts. Like I'm all for youth sports and athletics in general. I think they're huge. It is things that allow you to learn how to win and learn how to lose. But you made the comment, you said, I showed up and everybody else there was as good as me. And you started to have imposter syndrome set in. And can you maybe, for people that are not aware, let's expand on what is imposter syndrome first off. In your words, what is it?
I think imposter syndrome is self-doubt. So it's feeling, to me, it's like feeling you don't belong. Or you're not good enough to be there. Let's take it from like the work perspective. Let's say that you're an individual contributor, right? And then and you want to get into leadership, and you get promoted, and your boss puts you in. You get promoted to becoming a leader, and you think to yourself, "Am I even good enough to be a leader?" Well, my thoughts around that is it's not your responsibility to think you're good enough to be a leader at this point. You were given that position, and now it's your opportunity to prove you can do well. And it's like with me at Pepperdine, and I had a great, if you don't mind, I'll tell a really quick story about it.
Yeah, please.
So we had our first fall get together one-on-one with our coach, and it's kind of like a performance review. It's about a month into the preseason, and I walk into Andy Lopez's office, and I remember this like it was yesterday. And he was a very intimidating guy, and we reconnected after 30 years because I've learned so much from him. And so I come in and I sit down, and Andy Lopez sits forward, looks at me, and says, "Damon, when I recruited you to come to Pepperdine, I did so because I thought you would be a stellar talent, a starting third baseman, a huge contributor to our team. But unfortunately, son, I think I made a mistake. I don't believe you have the talent to play college baseball." And he sat back like this, took a beat, and I'm thinking to myself in my head, Mike, I'm like, "Oh my God, how do I get out of here? How do I get on a bus, go home? This is so embarrassing." And I'm, feel bad. Then he sat forward and he pointed at me and he said, "You know what, Damon?" And this is getting back to your about imposter syndrome. He said, "You know what, Damon? That's not what I think about you. That's not what the coaches think about you. We see your talent. We see the ability you have. The problem is it's in your head. You need to let go and believe in yourself, right? We can't do that for you." And that's something that stuck with me my whole life. And really, that's what imposter syndrome is that you don't really think that you belong or that you're not good enough. And that's in your own eyes, not in somebody else's.
Yeah, I've experienced many times and what's crazy in business, I've had people that have come to me. It's a very similar conversation, Damon, that somebody would come in and like they're struggling at work and you can't figure out why they're struggling. So I imagine this was like the time when you're saying, "Hey, I'm struggling at baseball," and he's calling me in and he's personifying. He's actually bringing to light all the things that you're saying to yourself in your head.
100%.
And then he's like, "No, you bonehead, take it out." Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had those conversations in business where somebody comes in and it's like, "Dude, you're not the same person that I interviewed." Mm-hmm. Right. The only person questioning you is you. Like if you look right here, not wavering, get to work. Right. And so I think that's really valuable to share. And then other times in business, have you experienced that as well? Like say when you're moving from receptionist to the next role, and then maybe when you first take on that CEO place, because I know I've experienced it. Like when I started doing leadership content on YouTube, I'm like, gosh, there's some really big people out here. Who am I to start to share this or share my knowledge? But one of the things that's so valuable is, and I've realized this as I've gotten older, you'll probably appreciate this, like there's not just one way. We get taught in school there's one way to get the answer. But as we get older and I think wiser, in business especially, there's so many other ways to get the answer. And not only that, but there's so many other opportunities for other answers if we stop and listen. So there are other times you've experienced that in your business career as well?
Yeah, well, Mike, first of all, I think what you're saying right there, in order to find different answers in different ways, is you got to be really curious, right? You got to be really curious and be open to be adaptable. And I think great leaders, they're humble. I mean, that's one of the 4 traits I think that's really important to be a leader. And so I'll openly admit, absolutely, I deal with imposter syndrome. It comes up every now and then. I'll give you a great example. When I was writing my book, right about the time I got finished, I was like, well, what if I put it out there and it sucks and nobody wants to read it, or it's embarrassing, And so I kind of thought to myself, well, what do I do? And then I said, well, let's just do it. Who cares? Get it out there. And then once I got it out there and some people kind of liked it, and people were coming to me saying, "Hey, I really like what you talk about here," or imposter syndrome, or trust tax, or how to coach. Then I said to myself, maybe I'll start doing podcasts. Maybe I'll start doing speaking. And I've given 1,000 internal presentations, and I've given, client meetings for years and years. But hopping on podcast as a guest, I was super intimidated. What if I go on these shows and I'm awful or I embarrass myself? But the way I got through that was I went all in. I just went all in and I just did it, and I took every opportunity and I learned from them. I think the first one I did was with a guy named Andy Stork, think tank, leadership think
Mm-hmm.
tank. And I ran into him at the New Orleans conference, the ATD. And I told him, I said, Andy, you were the first of like 70 podcasts I was on, and I was awful. But thank you for the opportunity to do so. And I just basically learned how to work my way through imposter syndrome. So for all your listeners out there, the first thing I'd start with is looking at, what is scaring you, right? What are you afraid of? And kind of putting a label on that, right? And then looking at like, what's the worst case scenario? If I go on a podcast or I take this job and I fall flat on my face, can I recover from it? And once you realize that, yes, you can recover from it, then go for it. Get comfortable with failure. Get comfortable with trying things. And instead of, getting so worried about it, give yourself a pat on the back that you're trying and you're actually
Absolutely.
trying and doing things.
So let me ask you, because you said you have a 3-step process to overcome imposter syndrome. Is that the first 2 or 3, or can you expand on that? Is it like, because I like to give tangible things on the podcast. So if I said, okay, well, what's the 3-step process for you for somebody, including myself, to overcome imposter syndrome? Could you give that 3 numbers and 3 steps for me?
Yes, because the way I just explained it to you, I almost did it backwards.
Okay.
Okay. So step number 1 is work hard. Outwork everybody. And I'm not saying you have to work 10 to 14 hours a day, but put in the work. There's no hacks to get through hard work. For me in baseball, I was the first guy on the field, the last one to leave. I outworked everybody. Step number 2 is be deliberate, be intentional. It's very easy, especially when you're intimidated by, to chase a shiny object or do busy work. If you want to be great at presenting, if you want to be great at being a podcast host, if that's what's worrying you, then you need to focus your attention and your energy on that. So step 1, work hard. Step 2, put in deliberate and focused practice. And then step 3, when it's game time, when the show starts, when you get that new job, step 3 is learn and let go. Get out there on the stage. Stop thinking about your techniques. Get out there and give it your best shot. You might knock it out of the park, Mike, and listeners. You might fail, right? But have fun with it. And if you're going into it and you realize that, hey, I've put in the hard work, I put in the practice, then give yourself a pat on the back for trying, doing your best, however it turns out, and then learn from every opportunity so you can get better and continue on next time. That's my 3-step process.
I love that. And I put it in the chat there, just in simplistic terms. You and I talked right before the show. Like, how do you get experience? There's no replacement for just putting in the genuine work and gaining the experience. And to me, that's one of the differences between knowledge and wisdom, right? Knowledge, hey, I know how to do it. Wisdom is applied knowledge. Wisdom, I've gone after it and I've failed. I've sucked. I have a friend of mine on YouTube, Roberto Blake, and he's one of I've heard him say it many, many times. He's like, look, you got to make 100 crappy videos. That's the bottom line. You're going to make 100 crappy videos. So whatever it is that the thing that you're at, you're going to do 100 crappy podcast episodes. You're going to give 100 crappy keynote speeches, right? You're going to give 100 crummy company and internal trainings. And the reality is, the only one that's labeling that, I think, in most times, and Damien, correct me if I'm wrong on this, is you. Like, you're harder on yourself. And like, I heard you say when you went up to the guy whose podcast you were on, you said, hey man, I'm sorry, I was really bad. He probably said, no, you were great. You taught a whole bunch of stuff, or I would hope he did.
No, he said I was absolutely terrible. Just kidding. No, he said, Mike, he said exactly what you said. He's like, well, I didn't realize that. You were actually good. You said you brought a lot of great stories.
Well, and when you talk about what you know, that's what wisdom is. That is true self-leadership, is to be able to, you said it earlier, being humble, right? Being humble enough to take those ego bruises and just share. Like, hey, here's what I did and here's the outcome. I'm curious. I also want to go back, because you leaned in a lot on the baseball and college baseball stuff. You said you had a lot of great coaches. And thinking back, I'm going to give you two specific times, either coaches in baseball or currently, I know you're the type of person, heck, you run a company called Learnit that has existing coaches right now. What are some of the key characteristics, like 4 or 5 key characteristics that you're saying, hey, this is something that I think people should look for in a leader and coach, and also something that you personally, Damon, if that's somebody you're connected with, hey, here's what I look for in a leader and coach, and that's why you can relay that to others?
I think that's a great question. And I think I'm just going to kind of flip it around a little bit to be like, what are the 4 key traits of a great leader, which also I think is makes a great coach. Is
Sure.
Number 1 is we hit on it, humility. And I'll go back. I want to name all 4 and I'll tell you a little bit about each one.
Please.
Number 1 is humility. Number 2 is integrity. You gotta have integrity. Number 3 is curiosity. I think if you're a coach, you have to be curious. And number 4 is you have to have courage. And so humility, we talked about that a little bit. I think it's important, even as a coach, as a leader, you can't have all the answers. It's okay to ask people for help. You have to ask people for help. I've always, throughout my career, I've wanted to be surrounded by people who are better than me. I want to have high A players who have different strengths than I do. And I could just be like, hey, so-and-so, how do you do this? So don't be afraid to say you don't know something. Integrity, that should go without saying. You have to show up and you have to do things the right way, be honest about things, because if you don't, Mike and listeners, people won't trust you. If you overpromise and underproduce, if you lie and you cheat, or you are a victim, then you'll lose trust, and trust is so important. Number 3, we spoke about this a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Great leaders, great coaches are curious. When you go into a one-on-one with somebody that you're coaching, and if you're dazing off and not paying attention, or you just have your own agenda, and that's kind of like what I really liked about our first conversation, Mike, on my podcast, and even today,
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you go off in different directions because you're curious, you're active listening, and you're actually in the moment. And I think that is so critical for great leaders. And number 4, when I talk about courage, I'm not saying we don't have the courage that these people who go into battle and war. That's just next level. But you need to have the courage to be able to number 1, make tough decisions. As a great coach, as a great leader, you need to make bold decisions, whether that's restructuring your team, rolling out a product, or making really tough decisions. You have to be decisive as a leader, and you also have to have the courage to fail, right? To stick your neck out there, try things, and learn and adapt. So that's what I've learned over the years from the great coaches I've had. I want to share one thing about a terrible coach, and
Yep.
and not only that, but the other leaders I've worked with. At Learnit, we're so lucky. We work with all these organizations, and I get to see kind of behind the curtains all these different leaders, like CEOs on down, of their leadership style, and some of them are awesome, some of them are not too good. But the one thing that I want your listeners to understand, if you're out there coaching a team, or you're coaching, or as a parent, or because that's leadership, of course, or
Absolutely.
you're leading an organization, a small business. I'll never forget. I had this head coach, who's, I'm not going to say who it is, but he's a big league manager now, and it was so funny when things went well. It was his pitching decisions. It was the lineup he put in. He was always out in front. Maybe that's why he's a big league manager now, because he always put himself in the spotlight. When things went bad, it was because our 4th up hitter, who was me, struck out twice, or the pitcher didn't do so and so. I think great leaders, they shine the spotlights on their team, right? On their coaches. On the players and their direct reports. They give them the wins. They praise
Mm-hmm.
them. They give gratitude for them. They give them the wins. And when things don't go well, the leader needs to be in front then and say, hey, this is on me. Learnit's my business. I screwed this up. I'm going to find a way to fix it. I think great leaders and great coaches know how to take accountability. And when they do take accountability, it gets people that want to play for them. It gets people who want to work for them because they know, hey, if I make a mistake or something happens, my coach or my leader is going to have my back. And that's so important.
I think those are great. You said 4, but I got 5. You said humility, integrity, curiosity, courage, and then you added accountability at the end. And I think that's something as well. Let me ask you a question. Can those be taught?
Can those be taught? That's a good question. I'm kind of curious to see what you think. I think that they can be improved upon. I think that it depends on if somebody has enough self-awareness to realize that they need to get better at certain things. And I do think that they can be taught, at least some of them, because 28 years ago or 26 years ago, after I was CEO, right when it was the .com boom. So I was like, oh man, I got this all figured out. I know all this. I'm a freaking genius at 26 years old. Well, we know what happened then. Everything collapsed, and if I didn't have my family at the time, I wouldn't have made through it. And I learned so many great lessons, and I learned how to become more humble, and I learned how to become more curious. I feel like I've always had integrity. At least I always knew to do the right thing. And I'd say it took me probably 10 years to have more courage to go out there and try to do things. And I hope that your listeners out there realize that it doesn't have to take 10 years to do the courage. So I think that way you can be taught, but the person who needs to be taught needs to be open to learning. They can't be a know-it-all. They have to be a learn-it-all.
Absolutely. And I think that's a strong statement. You said you were curious to hear what I thought.
Yeah.
I think that that's the most important part. The person that's on the receiving end has to be willing to be a student. And, like you commented, hey, this took 10 years. Time is a fickle teacher, right? So it's not always somebody teaching you, like we talked about, you mentioned the .com boom. It's not always that, hey, I'm going to sit down with Damon and he's going to have this perfect insight for me. Sometimes you're going through it and it's a economy shift. Sometimes you're going through it, it's a political shift, not to get down that track because we're going through all that right now. Yeah. But those outside forces can teach us as well. But on any one of those fronts, you have to be willing to be a student. Humility, just kind of to hang on this stuff for a minute. I remember when I first got into business, I'd been a business owner. And so then I got into sales at an automotive dealership. And, there's a fine line between cocky and confidence. And I learned that really fast. And it's sprinkling that real humility on, being humble enough to know that you're not going to have those wins all the time, that you can be impressionable. The things that surround that. Integrity, I agree with you. Can it be taught? Yeah, I think one of the, we almost always, I think a lot of people look at integrity as honesty or morality. It kind of goes hand in hand. But I think one of the things to realize is part of integrity is just doing what you say you will. If you're in alignment with yourself and you say, hey, I'm going to do this, that is the, morally right thing to do. People see that happen and it builds trust. Curiosity, you teach people to ask more questions. As you mentioned on these others, your own journey and experiencing and learning courage. So I do think they can. And I think more than taught, I think everybody has the ability, if they're willing to learn, to be taught things that we say. It's really easy for people to say, oh yeah, well, Damon, he's a badass. That guy's just a natural born leader. And then you're on the other side of it, or
Not
like
true.
myself. Yeah, right. You're on the other side of it going, no, I had to learn these things, right? It took some punches to the face. It took some falling down. You commented, you said, hey, if I hadn't had my family, your comment was, if you hadn't had your family in the 90s in the .com boom, that Learnit would have failed.
Yep.
Why do you say that? Can you expand on that for me?
Sure, I could expand on that, but there's something I want to touch on for your listeners. Great leaders aren't born, they're not made, they're constantly in the making. And I'm a big believer on that.
I love
right?
that.
And it's really true. And if you're somebody out there and you're a leader and you feel like you got it all figured out, well, guess what? You're in big trouble because things are always shifting and things are always changing. And And if you're somebody out there who wants to be a leader and you're like, oh my gosh, Damon or Mike's been doing this for 30 years and 25 years, that's, well, it didn't happen overnight. And I never in my wildest dreams imagined I'd be leading a learning and development company is really what I have. And so, but I put in the effort, I learned, I tried, I failed, and you can do that too. And I think that's so important. You can do that too. You got to go all in and go for it. Now, to answer your question, when the .com was doing well, I didn't listen to my dad. I said I wanted to overexpand. I said, let's open up locations in Southern California, Arizona, 2 more here. And my dad was like, hey, getting bigger isn't always better. But I looked at some of my friends who were paper millionaires. They were working all these places, and everybody was, millionaires on paper. And I didn't listen. And we got ourselves in a big financial rut to the point where I had to call up my dad and my grandfather and ask to cover cash flow, cover payroll. And I still remember those calls. They put me on speakerphone, and sometimes they'd be nice, and sometimes they would let me have it. But at the time, my father, who I lost, he was my idol in 2012. He didn't want to give up on Learnit. He's like, you're going to turn it around. We're going to make this happen. I love Learnit. I love what we're doing. So they supported me. And I never gave up, and my team never gave up, and we made it through that. And I think the important thing about that was that when the next big recession happened, Mike, in 2009, the Great Recession, I didn't have my family support then. We had our own struggles with real estate. Things didn't, really change on that front. But going into that, I learned what happened last, in the .com days, and made so many big changes, and I did things differently, right? If we had to downsize our team, we did it all at once instead of piecemeal, right? That's a terrible thing to do, piecemeal. We were proactive instead of reactive. I learned to over communicate to my team, to tell them how tough things were. I learned from reading a book on Winston Churchill or watching stuff on him. You be really honest with what's going on, but also have a positive outcome. Tell them you're going to reach a positive outcome. So these are all learning lessons. And my dad used to joke, and the dollar amount doesn't matter anymore, but he would tell me, Mike, around 2005, 2006, when we, or 2004, he'd say, you know what, you got the most expensive MBA that's probably out there, kid, but I'm so proud of you for pulling through. And I was able to pay them back all that money through different channels and everything, which has made me feel super proud as well. So
sure.
But for your listeners, I mean, we probably could have gave up right when that happened and just cut the cords. And maybe sometimes you should, not throw good money after bad. But I believed in Learnit. My dad believed in Learnit. We were helping a lot of people, and it's a story I'm really proud of, and shows you how to kind of deal with failure too.
Well, and I think there's a lot of strength in that story about grit. And for anybody, when you believe in something, there's a few things I'm picking up from you, Damon. One is I think people so often, and for anybody listening to this show, there's a lot of people, probably young leaders, that are thinking, hey, I want that opportunity. Like, it's easy to look from the outside in and go, man, if I was in that position, I would do this. So if I was in that position, I would do this. Yeah. And I hear, like, when you're going through that, you're going, okay, well, now I'm in that position, and woo, baby. And the reality is, then take the steps to put yourself in that position, right? You have to take action. You have to move. You have to be okay. You said it earlier, be okay with failure. You have to be okay to make some sort of move. If you're just waiting, and take this to the bank, write this down. If you are waiting on somebody else for your own success, for them to give you a title, that's not what leadership is.
You're going to be waiting a long time. And Mike, one thing I want to add to that is, let's say you're working in an organization and you want to get promoted. Well, you shouldn't wait till the job is posted and to get promoted. I think what's so important, especially for all the younger listeners out there, is the importance of personal brand, and getting in front of the leaders and doing all the work, and not to be a kiss up or anything like that, but have everybody in your organization know, be visible. And that's even so much more difficult in today's day and age with remote work, but you can find ways to do it. But what I'm saying is, if you want to get promoted, then start the process a year in advance, or 9 months in advance. Start doing things to get you noticed and to start building trust within your organization and your leaders. And if you want to start your own business, or you want to get a new job, you got to start somewhere. Nobody's going to be knocking on your door these days, especially these days. Take that first step, right? Whether it's getting on LinkedIn and putting out content, or start going through your network and asking for referrals, you have to do something. And you don't go from A to Z. It's a marathon more than a sprint. You just got to do the little steps and get small wins and milestones along the way.
Beautifully said. And I think, in addition to that, one of the things you said, hey, you've got to be seen. You got to put yourself out there. You're in advance. I think one of the things, and I've fallen on this sword more than once when it comes to this podcast. I think social media has diluted our communication quite a bit, because it's like, well, if I show this picture over here, it means I want this, right? And it's like, no, there's value in just going to somebody face to face. And like you're saying, whether it's a year beforehand, 6 months beforehand, a week beforehand, 5 years, I think it's valuable to have goals. And I think it's valuable to be very direct with those goals. Hey, Damon, I want an opportunity here. So what do I need to work on to do that? Where do I need to move? And so I think, that's one of the things that I'm hearing between the lines, if you will, is that it's when we're communicating with people, it's worth being direct and clear, because there's so much that gets watered down with social media, I guess, if you will. And because we're so engaged in that in many areas of our lives, that affects our one-on-one communication as well. I got a comment here from Ben. Ben, thanks for watching today too, by the way, man. It says, demonstrate you understand what's happening from a leadership perspective, work out what needs to happen, and start saying it out loud. You'll get noticed. And I think that's valuable. It's right on the money. It's just be direct, say it out loud.
Mike, I think you're totally right. We have a class at Learnit called Manage Up, and that's kind of like what you have to do. And I think if you're an individual contributor and you want to advance in the organization you're in, a great way to do it is, first, be self-aware enough to look at, okay, if you're on Zoom calls and you're not in person, and your leadership is wearing suits, or just you got to kind of model that as well too. I'm not saying anybody really wears suits anymore, but
Sure.
you got to show up professionally, right? You got to show up professionally, and you have to be assertive. You got to let people know that you want something, right? As a leader, I want people coming to me and saying, "Hey, Damon, I really aspire to do this." And the other thing you can do is, so if you want to do it in threes, have the executive presence you need, be assertive, to make people know that you should be out there doing that. And the third one is, figure out what you could do to help your leader. What can you do to help make their lives easier, right? Is there extra work you could take on for them? Is there things you could do that's more proactive? Is there other areas you could help out? Help make their lives easier. Those are all things, again, that will help you move in that position to, get yourself elevated throughout your time in that organization.
I love it. I love that you're sharing in threes. I think we chunk information in threes. That's probably one of the things. But you said executive presence, being assertive, and then helping your leader. I would go even as far as to say, just helping others moving towards the goal. If you're doing that, that's helping the leader move towards the goal.
I should say help your organization, but take your leader, help them help you, right? So you're helping them help you. And part of that, last thing I'll say about that, and there's a book called Rising Leaders. We had a guy by the name of Mark J. Silverman. I don't know if he's been on your show. You should have him on. And he talks about this, is learn your leader's communication style, right? So I mean, not everybody communicates the same way. I mean, for me, if somebody sends me a 3-paragraph email, I'm never ever gonna read it, right? So,
Right.
but if they send me 5 bullet points or they make a 30-second video, my team knows that. So, help your leader out, learn what their communication styles are, so they don't have to adjust to you. You adjust to them. And you might say, well, he's the leader, she's the leader, they should have to adjust to me. That's not how it works. That's not how it works. If you want to keep growing and evolving, you adjust to them, be assertive with them, have the executive presence, and there you go.
No, I love it. And I think I had a gal, I want to say it was Carrie Kingham, might have been Kimberly the week after that, that had said the same thing. And it was, it was a lady I was interviewing, and she said, yeah, I had to learn how my leader communicated. And all of a sudden, when I did that, like the whole world opened up. All of a sudden, like they weren't paying attention to me. They weren't giving me opportunities. And at one point, I think she said in the conversation, she says, well, I thought it was because I was a female. And she goes, I realized it was because I was just not communicating in a style that worked for him. And once I did that, all of a sudden the whole world opened up. So I think it's powerful you say that. One thing you said a minute ago, and I want to expand on this, you were talking about the power of communication. You said, hey, going back to how you had learned from the early experience where Learnit almost failed, to moving forward to round 2, 2008, 2009, when there was a struggle. And you said, one of the things that I did, I was communicating with my team. I sometimes over communicated with my team. So from a leadership perspective, you don't think that was what I was going to ask. Can you over communicate with people?
No, not at all. So
why do you have that perspective?
I would delete that from the episode, but if I said that, you can't over communicate, especially during challenging times. And not only can you not over communicate, but you got to do it in all these different channels, right? You got to do it over email. You got to do it over Slack. You got to do it over one-on-one meetings. If you're a leader or you're running an organization, you have to constantly communicate and be as transparent as you can. I mean, you can't, there's some things maybe you can't talk about, but be as transparent as you can, because Mike, if you might think you're communicating enough, but if you're not, what happens? Here's what happens. People start formulating things in their mind that may not necessarily be true. And I think it's very common for all of us to take things to the very worst situation, right? The very worst situation. And they may say, hey, this is a sinking ship. I'm going to get out. I'm going to leave, right? Or they may just be so scared for their job that their personal life is suffering and they're not getting enough sleep, and that is affecting them at work. But if you're out there and you're communicating, and if you have, like at Learnit, we probably have, 12 other managers, they have to be out there communicating as well, right? So you lead by example, you communicate, you over communicate, and you be as transparent and open as you can, so that people, again, can trust you and trust the direction you're going in, and help reinforce the vision and the clarity of the vision that you have.
So when you're doing that, and I agree with you to a point. I think there are certain things you can over communicate. You at the end there, and again, this is opinionated. We could agree or disagree.
That's totally fine.
I think communicating the vision, the clarity, the transparency. I think there are things at times that should be more in executive circles or leadership circles. If you're saying, because those are the sort of things, like when I was saying over communicate, and I don't want to, just to not mistake it, I wasn't saying you said, I think you were saying you over communicated. I wasn't saying that was a bad thing, just to be clear. But when you're doing all of those things, how do you know if it's working, Damon?
Well, that's a great question. And just to take it a step back, and I said, you want to be as transparent as you can, but there are certain things that should stay within the executive realm. I mean, there's certain things that you can't. How do you know things are working?
How do you know your communication is working specifically? How do you?
I guess how I would know my communication is you can kind of sense the vibe of your team. And I don't care how big your organization is, you can find time to have 10, 15-minute chats with people, either over text, but I prefer on Teams, which we use Teams, and just see how they're doing, right? And you could tell if somebody comes in and they're all hunched over or they're worried, great.
Sure.
And I could tell you an example of how when things aren't working. One of our customers said that they had to do layoffs, and people were shocked. They were shocked by that. And so I said, well, why do you think that they were shocked? And as we kind of went through a couple whys, it was because they weren't transparent enough that things weren't going well. So if somebody who's, if somebody's an engineer, they may not know what the quarterly sales numbers are, right? They don't need to know everything, but it shouldn't be that much of a surprise where all of a sudden you have to do a 15% riff. And some people are like, well, I had no idea. I mean, I'm really busy, right? I'm really busy. So I figured everything was going well here. So that's what I'm talking about as far as, that's an example of your communication not working, where in reverse, it is working if you can see people's look in their eyes like, hey, I get it. I get, that we need to change and do differently.
No, and I think that's really good. And I agree with you. I've been in situations too. I had a mentor, a manager years ago that told me, he said, look, if you're ever, one of the most uncomfortable things from a management perspective, not necessarily leadership, because I think there's leaders at different levels, but from a management perspective is like having to let someone go, whether it's through a layoff or having to fire somebody, they're in the wrong person, wrong seat. It's terrible because you're affecting that person's life and their livelihood. But I remember somebody telling me, because I was like, man, I was so uncomfortable as a young manager having to be engaged in those things. And he said, here's the biggest thing you can do. The biggest favor you can do for anybody is just communicate it. Nobody should ever be surprised when you're coming to them with something. And so I think that's sort of what you're saying. And one of the things that you brought in there, I think one of the ways that you can determine communication is working is if when you're having to engage in that conversation, hey, here's this bad thing that's going to happen, this terrible thing, or here's the direction the company's headed. If people take a vested interest and they start offering you ideas and perspective, then I think that's something that is, it's like, okay, hey, this is next level because now I don't have to be the only problem solver, right?
Oh, so, I mean, what you said right there, your listeners, take out your pen or pencil and write that down, right? Because when you go into a tough situation, you can't do it alone. I don't care who you are, right? You can't do it alone. And if you get everybody from your front line, the ones dealing with your customers, to your leadership, and everybody's coming to you with ideas and you're all working together. I always like to say, like, you can't go into battle by yourself, right? You want to go in, you want a team to go in, and you want people coming up with ideas. Hey, we should try this. We should do this. We should pivot and do this. That is so important. I want to step back for 1 second though.
Sure.
And for anybody who has to let somebody go, it's awful. Sometimes if it's a situation where they're a non-performer, one way to look at it is, though, first of all, you should never be surprised. You should never be surprised. Mm-hmm. They should never be surprised. But if they're performing miserably in their job, Mike, they probably are miserable coming to work. So at some point, you're probably you're doing them a favor. It still shouldn't be a surprise, but maybe they don't have the courage or it's tough to go out and just quit. But you're freeing them up to go find a job that they could be more successful at. Number two, as a small business owner or a leader, and you're really struggling to let somebody go, and maybe it's a group of people, but a portion of your team, and it's really hard. It's really hard. But what you got to look at and you got to remember, and this goes back to the number 4, courage, is you got to make bold decisions and you got to do what's best for your overall team. Because if you don't make the right and tough decisions as a leader and your entire organization goes away, then the other 90% of people are now out of a job, right? So you, as much as that situation is rough and really hard, you got to look at it from those two perspectives. I think that you got to look at the overall, for the individual, but also, you got to do right and what's best for your organization.
Yeah. And I think I think that's one of those things as a leader, and there is a difference between leaders and managers. As a leader, and you're somebody that does have a vested interest, you care about that person. and this can seem twisted, but I'm going to go ahead and say it because I think what you're saying is valuable. Like, you have to care enough to let somebody go and say, hey, this isn't the right fit. Not only is it a show of care for them to be able to, because those times are not always like, they're not always headbutting that it's like, well, I don't like this person. They're not performing. They're not doing themselves any favors. They're not doing the organization any favors. And other people see that. So it's a form of caring for the rest of, just like what you said, the rest of the organization, the other people. I'm curious, we're coming to the tail end of the hour. It's already been almost an hour, man. I get to jamming in this stuff. I had some other questions written down. We'll have to have you back, or I'm either going to have to start going Joe Rogan style at 4 hours or have you back for another episode.
I have to have you back in another episode too. I mean, we had a great conversation on my Learn It All podcast.
Absolutely. And here's a couple things, because I've forgotten to say this until the end, but that I will absolutely plug Damon here. I've put it on the screen several times, but make sure to check out Damon's website. You can go to learnit.com. It's just learnit.com. So if anybody, I just slipped my mind today. I've had it on the screen, but to make sure for the people listening to the podcast afterwards, certainly you can look to connect with Damon Lembi. I imagine on LinkedIn, it's Damon, last name Lembi, Lembi. Right? Am I spelling that right?
Yep, you got it.
That's without even looking it up. and so you connect with Damon there, connect with him on the website. Check out the website, like a really powerful platform. And then definitely check out, I had a great conversation. I really enjoyed sitting in and having a conversation with you on your podcast, the Learn It All podcast also. So make sure you look that up. So any final thoughts to take us out for this afternoon, Damon?
No, this has been great, and your episode will be out in a couple of weeks. I also have a book, the Learn It All. I don't know if you can see that or not.
There
Learn
it
It All
is.
later.
Yep.
My final thoughts are: I think what's really important is, again, I just want to state that great leaders aren't born; they're not made; they're in the making. So there's always more to learn. If you want to be a leader, you can definitely, whether it's self-leadership or whatever, just keep working hard. And for any of you who connect with me on LinkedIn, and if you do, I'll send you a code for a free class. I mean, the classes are $250. So if you want to take that Manage Up class that I mentioned, or AI and leadership, or just emotional intelligence, or how to use Excel, connect with me on LinkedIn. Check me out on the Learn It All podcast. And Mike, I'm really grateful for you having me here today. I had a great time. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, all your insight and wisdom, and just sharing so openly and candidly. I mean, I've enjoyed connecting with you recently, and I really think my audience will get a lot out of our conversation. So thank you, Damon. I'm going to take us out for just a minute. If you'd just hang out for one moment. Okay.
Got it.
And folks, that is going to bring us to a close for another episode of the Leadership Toolkit with my new friend, Damon Lembi. He's awesome. Please go check out his show. Connect with him on LinkedIn, message him. So, if you want to take some of those courses and classes there, it's just an awesome platform. So check him out. For everybody, do me a favor. One of the only ways this podcast continues to grow, get the word out. We go live every Wednesday at 12:05. It's live, open conversation. I share it then on YouTube afterwards. Certainly I share it on Spotify. If you've had a good experience, you could leave a Spotify review. You could throw some thumbs up there on that YouTube video. Most importantly, and the whole reason that I do this, and I interview these amazing individuals, is so that you can impact your life and you can grow yourself and you can grow someone else. So if you know somebody else that could grow from this message, please share it with them. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. And until we speak next Wednesday, we'll be here. Stay great. We'll talk soon, everybody.